Got the New England mystery violin. I'm guessing circa 1900, 1920. That's just a guess. Has all the patina of age commensurate with approximately 100 years old, give or take. I have a bow that I've just recently acquired. It was made by a feller who's apparently deceased now, contemporary bow maker by the name of Steve Reiley. He was up in Michigan, I believe. Was it Ann Arbor? I forget exactly. Allegedly, this bow was in the possession of some old feller in Peoria, Illinois. And the shop that I bought it from was selling it for the family, because the old feller that used to own this has passed on, and they are selling off his stuff. Having said all of that, Steve Reiley. Not to be confused with the fantastic Cajun accordionist Steve Reiley, who I believe has often recorded under the moniker Steve Reiley and the Mamu Playboys, who I have actually seen play, by the way. Unbelievable band. My second wife and I went down to New Orleans. Oh God, this must have been the mid-90s, early 90s, maybe around 93 or 94, 95. We were going down to visit a friend of hers who was if you can imagine this, he was a gay Lutheran minister who had recently acquired a gig as a pastor or a minister of a Lutheran church down in the suburbs of New Orleans. So we were kind of going to visit him, but we ended up going down into the French Quarter to party with the aforementioned minister. So it was just my wife and the minister and I. And I mean to tell you, brother, boy, we just barely made it out of there before sunrise, if you get my meaning. And I mean to tell you, man, we had some fun. God damn, we had some fun. But my wife and I found a club where Steve Reiley was playing. 2 fiddlers, double fiddles almost the whole way through. They were loud as a motherfucker. Fairly small club. And long, narrow room. And they were on a long stage on one side of the room. And they were just loud as 10 motherfuckers. God damn. And we were dancing up a storm. It was just fantastic. The folly of youth, I suppose. I would have been in my 30s back then. I actually find that hard to believe when I say it. That there was even ever a time when I was actually in my 30s. Just sounds funny and sounds very strange to even say it. I cut my teeth on fiddling, fiddle music in general in central Missouri. And I used to hang out with guys like Taylor McBain. I used to see guys like Jake Hockemeyer and Pete McMahan and Taylor and several others show up at the local contests in the area. I also have a fond memory of going to a big celebration of the publication of R.P. Christeson's Old-Time Fiddle Repertoire book, Volume 1, which came out in 1973. It was actually printed by the University of Missouri Press, which was, of course, located right there at the University of Missouri campus in Columbia, Missouri, where I was going to school back in 73. Just sheer dumb luck that I happened to be around when R.P. Christeson released the book, and he threw a big, huge party over in a banquet room over at the Student Union building, and a whole mess of great old-time fiddlers were there. R.P. himself got up and played some tunes. I actually took my fiddle over there. They finally called me up. I didn't feel like I at all qualified to be on the stage with any of those guys, which I really didn't. But I knew a few tunes, and I was earnestly learning how to play the fiddle with everything I had. And I had a little bit of I had some command of the fiddle already by that point, and can whip on some of the common tunes pretty good, tunes like Soldier's Joy and so forth. So I got up and I played, it probably was something like Soldier's Joy that I played with a lot of the old timers, which of course included Taylor McBain and Pete McMahan. So speaking of Pete, that gnarly old crusty son of a bitch, he he knew a whole mess of really amazing fiddle tunes. But among them was a tune a waltz that I was particularly fond of once upon a time. And I just thought of it again tonight as I was trying out my new Steve Reiley bow. I'm really going to do my best to try to get through this tune. It's not going to be easy. The Ozark Mountain Waltz. The Ozark Mountain Waltz. A beautiful piece, actually. I don't know if that's something that Pete made up. I don't know if he pulled it out of his yin-yang, or whether there was such a piece prior to him that was floating around central Missouri. I do not know. The man to ask, though, would certainly be Dr. Howard Marshall, who is a scholar of Missouri fiddling, with whom I had recent contact, I might add, because a rather amazing thing happened, and I'll be right back. very interesting thing kind of happened. I was surfing around on reverb.com. It's a musical instrument site for selling musical instruments. I was surfing around on reverb.com, and I happened upon this violin. Which was made by a feller by the name of Augustus Reitz. In actuality, it's probably pronounced Reitz. R-E-I-T-Z, Reitz. Because the reason I would say that is because I used to work at a violin shop in St. Louis, Missouri, owned by Jeffrey Seitz, S-E-I-T-Z. And I've always been under the understanding that in German, the EI is pronounced I. If it was IE, it would be pronounced E. So S-E-I-T-Z would be Seitz. Consequently, R-E-I-T-Z would be Reitz. Be that as it may, I was surfing around one evening. I had been keeping my eye on this violin on reverb.com, and a friend of mine from Missouri, who was also a violin maker, drove out to Arizona here to visit me. And we were hanging around here, and he said, "What are you looking at there?" And I said, "Well, I've been tracking this violin, trying to decide if it's anything I want to get involved with." And he said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "It appears to be made by this Chicago maker back in 1924. Augustus Reitz, or Reitz, or Reitz. We'll call it Reitz. We'll say Reitz from here on out." And this feller, my buddy who was visiting me, he said, "Reitz? Really? A Chicago maker?" I said, "Yeah, around 1924. I believe it's numbered 87 on my violin." So he was no slouch. He was an active violin maker. Made a lot of instruments, apparently. My buddy, whose name, by the way, is Greg Crone, Greg said, "That's the same maker that made the violin that Dr. Howard Marshall plays on." And Dr. Howard Marshall is the feller that I just mentioned, who lives in Missouri and is a scholar of Missouri fiddling. He has published no fewer than 3 books, I believe, on Missouri fiddle music and living and deceased fiddlers around Missouri. And he has analyzed Missouri fiddling styles by region around the state, and he's cataloged gobs of tunes. He's collected stories and biographies about so many different fiddlers. He's quite the scholar and quite the academic. And he, according to Greg Crone, my buddy who was visiting me, he pronounced that that's the same maker that made the violin that Howard Marshall plays on. And I had actually seen that violin that Howard plays on. I competed against him in a fiddle contest back in Missouri a couple of years before I moved out here to Arizona. I would say this must have been around 2014. And it was a very dark varnished fiddle, very, very dark. But had a fantastic sound. It always impressed me with its tone and its sound when Howard would take the stage. I actually have heard that violin more than once at a couple of different contests. So anyway, imagine my surprise when Greg told me that this violin that I had been looking at was made by the same maker as Howard's fiddle. So that kind of lent an air of mystique and desirability to this violin. So obviously, since I'm holding it in my hand, you can see that I actually did follow through, and I made a deal on it with the seller. and I got it for a pretty darn fine price, I might add. But it's going to need a lot of work, and I'm going to have to recarve the neck a little bit. It's a little bit thick. It's a little too hefty. The fingerboard is too hefty, and it's too low. So I'm going to wedge up the fingerboard and bring the fingerboard up substantially. And it's going to need a new sound post, new bridge. Unfortunately, one of the reasons I got it for such a fine price was because the whole top and the back have been revarnished. It's not original varnish. I was very sad to find that out. The sides and the scroll are all original varnish, which has a much nicer look about it. A much more impressive color. It's a kind of a very dark orangish to brown, a brownish orange. I wish to hell the whole entire fiddle had been left intact. But it is what it is, and I'm going to actually try to improve upon the color matching of the top and the back to get the top and back to sort of more closely match the color scheme of the original varnish. So, but this fiddle's going to need quite a lot to bring it around to my way of thinking. But it's actually got some good, there's strength in the tone there. There's strength. And it's got a little bit of a cutting edge, but a lot of solidity, a lot of substance to the sound. I'm quite pleased with the potential that I find in that violin. Quite pleased indeed. So, there you have it, folks. I'll play one last tune here very quickly. Let's see here. How about that one called Greenback Dolly-o from Melvin Wine? Greenback Dolly-o. Have a nice evening.